Continental boundaries have forever really been changing. I mean, if you take Egypt for instance, for a long time it wasn't considered African, it was considered part of Asia, and some people still consider the Sinai to be part of Asia. But Alexander, the ancient Greek geographer, marked the beginning of Africa as the Nile, and most people until around about the 19th century considered Egypt to be part of Asia. But I think when people talk about continents, I think they fail to mention one thing, and that's that continents were largely created to sort of explain the differences in culture, and the ancient Greeks didn't see themselves as belonging to any continent. The Europeans, in their eyes, were the barbarians to the north, and they sort of stood in the middle. And in early Christian geographers sort of saw each continent as being inhabited by the different sons of Noah. So early medieval maps often showed the descendants of Ham, who were allegedly black, living in Africa, the descendants of Shem, i.e. the Semitic, living in Asia and Egypt, and Japheth's descendants living in Europe. And later on, Christendom and Europe became somewhat synonymous, but the border between Europe and Asia remains somewhat disputed, and that's because the ancient Greeks marked the Phasis River as the boundary, but this river only runs through the Caucasus, so what's north of the Caucasus remains disputed. Now historically it was the Don River, which sort of made Ukraine part of Europe and very little of Russia, but over time it gradually began to push further and further east. In the 18th century, a geographer named von Stahlenberg moved it further east to the Volga River, but now most people sort of say it's the Ural River or the Ural Mountains. Now the Ural River ends here in Kazakhstan, well in western Kazakhstan, so this is why Kazakhstan is often included in Europe and it is able to play in the UEFA Cup, for instance. Kazakhstan joined the European Football Cups essentially in 2002, and they probably did so for money. But the disputed boundaries could be more, well, not as trivial as just football. After all, if you look at membership into the EU, people like Berlusconi wanted Israel to join, and there seems to be no geographical reason why they shouldn't. After all, Cyprus, which is just across the sea, was historically part of Asia, but is now largely considered part of Europe. Otherwise, there's Istanbul, which lies on the border of Europe and Asia. There's Malta, which is now largely considered to be European, but in historical times used to be considered part of Africa, and of course there's Caucasian states like Georgia, which has agreements with the EU, and Spain has territory in Africa, and Morocco used this territory to claim for EU membership in the 1980s.